It's Sunday, August 18, 2024. I'm Anthony Davis. Welcome to the Weekend Show, where we make the time to consider the news of the week. You can support my work and independent journalism at patreon.com/5minute news. Our guest today is a physician, a forensic and social psychiatrist, and a world expert on violence, and is currently president of the World Mental Health Coalition. She became known to the public as the editor of the New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. She predicted that the Trump presidency would not end with the 2020 election and warned of the violence that was to come. Dr. Bandy Lee, welcome back to The Weekend Show.
Thank you for having me back.
So we have so much to talk about. The political landscape has changed unrecognizably just in the last month, with Joe Biden stepping aside and endorsing his vice president, Kamala Harris, for president. Donald Trump did not like that. He didn't see it coming. He'd planned to kind of pit against Joe Biden, who he thought was an easy person to win against. Now Trump is the oldest candidate in the race, and Kamala Harris's polls are shooting up every single week. Again, not something that the narcissistic personality of Donald Trump takes very kindly to. So I want to talk about how his kind of mental health has evolved during this period. But first, I just want to hear from you, just your reaction to the current Donald Trump, the one that we're getting since the race changed.
Yes, I think the contrast is quite remarkable in that, I've commonly, I was asked about Joe Biden's mental health, and I continued to try to divert the attention back to Donald Trump because he was the one who was deflecting and projecting his own problems onto Biden. And unfortunately, by the time he was running for office again, he had carried on too much of that projection, with the public not quite understanding that it is indeed exaggerated projection of Donald Trump's own impairments. But now we see the contrast. Biden, as any fit person would do, was able to concede. He was flexible enough to remove himself, although it was not something he wanted to do, obviously. And the Democratic Party itself was able to change gears onto a new candidate who, in historically unprecedented ways politically, and all these are signs of health. The flexibility, resilience, and ability to meet the needs of the time, no matter how radical or how dramatic a change it calls for. Donald Trump, on the other hand, we see the same has not happened. In fact, he's having a great difficulty pivoting his message, his ability to cope with the situation. And you pointed out very well that his emotional fragility is such that he was never able to, he had trouble even maintaining himself when he had all the advantages. Even while he was the US president, he could not tolerate his not having the biggest crowd size at inauguration, for example. And now he's fixated on the same issues and not able to get out of them. But this is what we predicted from the very start, that we are dealing with someone who is severely mentally impaired, who is impaired to the point of being dangerous and even existentially dangerous. And those dangers actually have not gone away. So while everyone, like myself, is rejoicing that we now have a very viable option to defeat Donald Trump at the ballot box, what is happening to him psychologically, we see obviously that he is disintegrating, deteriorating, and falling apart. That may not be so obvious to many of his followers. And as he continues to hold press conferences and continues to try to survive this moment, he may very well recapture the public again. And that's what I describe as Trump contagion. So the advance of the Trump contagion should not exceed what is unraveling before our eyes in terms of his mental health, as well as the healthy responses on the part of his opponent.
That's what I want to talk to you about, is how the support doesn't seem to be wavering for Donald Trump. I mean, it amazes me that he was polling at nearly 50%, and even now it's down 47, 45. But that's not the point. That's still 45% potentially of the electorate that thinks that despite all of the insanity and all of the racism and the bigotry and the hatred and the negativity and obviously the lies, that he's still their man. And obviously that says quite a lot about America. But what does it say about the Trump contagion syndrome, this notion that once people are in the cult of Trump, that whatever he does, their support will be unwavering?
So my fear is that now that we have a very viable candidate who has not been the depository of so much projection and manipulation on the part of Donald Trump, that we're starting anew and we have renewed hope. But what we do not recognize is that we cannot deal with this situation as an ordinary presidential campaign. As long as we have mental pathology in politics, which is how I've been describing fascism, because it's not really a political ideology. In fact, it's something that follows along the principles of psychiatry that psychiatrists like myself and other mental health experts deal with on an everyday basis in our practice. As you know, very early on, when the Trump presidency started, we actually decided that we should come public with our medical consensus. And that's how I held the conference at Yale School of Medicine, which was immediately caught on by the news in 50 different countries and 5 continents at that time. And I was invited by Congress members to speak with them and eventually to meet with them. When our book came out, it was an unprecedented New York Times bestseller of its kind, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. And within 3 months, we were the #1 topic of national conversation. That was actually an organic development on the part of the people, trying to address the very distressing reality that they saw before them. And even when we were meeting with Congress members, and we eventually met with over 50 of them, they were looking to us to speak about the problem medically so that they could intervene politically. And so that would have been a rational approach. What happened, unfortunately, was that at the height of our influence, when even senior journalists told us that we had arrived, in other words, we had made an intervention possible so that we could stop this incredible threat to our nation and the world in a rational way. But that was when the American Psychiatric Association intervened very aggressively alongside the pharmaceutical industry supported New York Times, and blacked us out of all major media within 2 or 3 weeks. It was very dramatic. And ever since, we are experiencing what we would predict in such a situation, that the pathology would not go away on its own, just like the COVID-19 pandemic doesn't just go away because you wish for it, but continue to spread. And I've been trying to describe that as Trump contagion, because we often think of ourselves as being isolated individuals, especially in terms of mental health. But in fact, we're highly interconnected, and symptoms do spread. social media studies have shown that negative emotions spread more quickly than positive ones. Well, delusions spread more quickly than ordinary thought, and severe symptoms spread much more rapidly. And so what we're dealing with now is not a simple political phenomenon, and we've made the error again and again of trying to deal with it as such. I'm afraid we're still not prepared, and this election will be a really critical one. And for that reason, we're trying to make up for the vacuum of mental health expertise, in that we're planning on a major all-day conference at the National Press Club. We've gotten a small amount of donation to be able to begin the project, but we'll need a lot more funding. We're in the midst of doing fundraising, but if it were to go major, we'd like to feature, as we did in our last major conference there in the year before the 2020 election, we featured 13 experts from all different fields. They were top experts in the country coming together with mental health experts to say that the dangerous state of the world requires fit leadership, and that that conference was considered important enough to be covered by C-SPAN of all the 3 hours. We'd like to put together something like that again, and that is basically to warn at the most critical time, perhaps in our history so far, of the importance of considering these matters which have been ignored so far.
There has been a little bit of a shift in terms of the media's understanding of his mental health condition. George Conway started a pack about him being unfit to lead. Dr. John Gartner's started a Shrinking Trump podcast, which is getting a lot of attention, where his not just his mental decline, because there's two things, isn't there? There's the dementia issue, which is not something that worries me so much, because it's a slow progressing illness, but the greater threat
to the public,
and very obvious, right? But the greater threat is the political rhetoric that is born of the narcissistic personality disorder, and to the point that he undoubtedly plans to cheat in this election, as he did in 2020, whether it be claiming that the election's over at 9 p.m. because all of the lineup votes have been counted and the mail-in ones haven't, or there is talk of the fact that they've already installed election deniers in these state legislatures who will refuse to certify the election, and so that the election will effectively be undecided, and Donald Trump will claim that he is the winner. Obviously, the media is keeping an eye on that. I'm slightly concerned that we don't have enough systems, checks and balances in place to protect us from that. And then, of course, we have the relationship with the Heritage Foundation and also the MAGA Supreme Court, and that doesn't help matters either. So there will be clearly another January 6th style event. Do you think that's the reason why Trump doesn't seem to be making much effort to campaign? Because he's not traveling the country like Kamala Harris and Tim Walz is. He's doing these kind of weird press conferences at his own venues. Is it that in the back of his mind, he's been reassured that he's got the election in the bag, and therefore he doesn't have to do traditional electioneering to win it?
I think he understands very well that traditional campaigning is not what he needs. What he needs is public exposure in order to spread his symptoms. That's what he has survived on, and what his popularity has risen on, and how he has also manipulated the media in ways where it used to be that propaganda channels would shape people's thoughts. But now he has the media following him because they have figured out that his spread of symptoms is far more catching in ways that will boost ratings and bring revenue in ways that nothing else they have seen can. And so he is, I believe, deliberately avoiding venues that Harris and Walz are seeking. I think he had that one rally in the same stadium even that Kamala Harris did hers, and found such a stark comparison, that so much so that he had to come up with even delusional level ideas, such as that her crowds are artificial intelligence generated, that his crowds were 30 times larger, that he had a bigger crowd than Martin Luther King Jr. That kind of thinking shows his fragility, but it also shows that his survival mechanism will be kicking in. And so much so that he knows, well, he has honed this in his entire life. He's a master manipulator. People think of him as a great entertainer or great salesman, but it goes beyond that. His symptoms are such that people like he were called spellbinders, because once they get into the public arena, they can beguile and hypnotize people in ways that few people can, and certainly rational persuasion can do very little of. I'm very glad that there's more discourse on his mental impairments and unraveling, and many people who are speaking have gotten their information from us, and I hope one day George Conway will speak about the input I gave him on his own article. But people, we also need to deal with it in a sober way that will truly put in safeguards and give us an understanding of what we are dealing with. I think Conway has been focusing on provoking Trump and getting him to show his symptoms for others to see, which is also a good method. But we also need to be aware of the extreme dangers that will bring, because he has a far more ballooned sense of himself, and his expectations have gone far beyond even his first presidential term. And not only that, he has institutions and groups and power structures to support him, as you said, the Heritage Foundation, the Supreme Court, as well as foreign leaders who would do anything to put him back in power, including endangering the safety of the entire globe. I'm speaking specifically of Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu, who were vastly psychologically emboldened during Trump's presidency. People by his rhetoric that he was a peaceful president who didn't start any wars, but you could see how much of a shift in geopolitical direction he has induced, not only by upending the world order and creating a climate for conflict over cooperation and building alliances, but he has really emboldened dangerous dictators who mirror his psychology. And of course,
so we're seeing that in Turkey, we've seen that in Venezuela, we've seen it in Hungary. So you're saying that Donald Trump, by nature of being the American president that had these extremist positions and did not subscribe to the institutions and the protocols, that gave rise, I mean, Bolsonaro, I guess, in Brazil, although he's not there anymore, is another example where they become copycat dictators, because if he can do it, they can do it too.
Yes, absolutely. You, as a global traveler, would know, as I have, having studied global health, just how influential American practices are abroad, even our errors.
Yes.
And to add mental symptoms on top of that makes it hugely influential and spreading and contagious. And we see it not only in foreign leaders, but also in domestic leaders and politicians in local governments, how much of a cultural shift he has enabled.
And interestingly, once these dictators become criminalized, or the threat of criminality, so Netanyahu with his corruption trials is an example, Berlusconi in Italy was another one, who, when they are fighting the judiciary, their politics becomes more extreme and their rhetoric becomes more extreme. And with Donald Trump, with his 34 felony counts, the sexual abuse, not to mention the trials that haven't even come to bear yet. I mean, he is having to ramp up the rhetoric, mainly because he knows that if he doesn't win the presidency, he's going to go to jail.
That's right. So he's vying not just for the presidency, but trying to keep himself out of prison. And we underestimate him if we do not stretch our imagination to consider all the possible actions that he could take, and he would stop at nothing. In fact, because he was not held accountable for the first attempt to overturn the government, the second time will be far bolder and better planned, especially with those who are helping him. He has vast groups, oligarchs, power structures supporting him, not because they like him, but because he is useful to them for his mental impairments.
It's so interesting. Okay, I want to talk about his attempted assassination next and how that might have affected him, if at all, interestingly. We'll do that next here on The Weekend Show. I'm excited to tell you about Moink. That's Moo plus Oink. Moink is a meat subscription box company on a mission to fight for the family farm. They're located in rural America, run by an 8th-generation female farmer. Their animals are raised humanely, their employees are paid a living wage, and the quality of their product is better than anything you'll find in a store. Moink delivers grass-fed and grass-finished beef and lamb, pastured pork and chicken, and sustainable wild-caught Alaskan salmon straight to your door. Moink farmers farm like our grandparents did, and as a result, Moink meat tastes like it should, because the family farm does it better, and the Moink difference is a difference you can taste. Unlike the supermarket, Moink gives you total control over the quality and source of your food. You can choose the meat delivered in every box, like ribeyes to chicken breasts, pork chops to salmon fillets, and much more. Plus, you can cancel any time. Moink is helping to save rural America. Join the Moink movement today. Keep American farming going by signing up at moinkbox.com/weekend right now. And listeners to this show get free hot rolls in your first box. The best hot rolls you'll ever taste, but for a limited time. Spelt MOINK box.com/weekend. That's moinkbox.com/weekend. We're back with Dr. Bandy Lee here on The Weekend Show. I'm Anthony Davis. An unprecedented event happened a few weeks ago, which none of us could have predicted, and that was that Donald Trump experienced an attempted assassination upon his life at his own rally, and on the other end of the gun, or the AR-15, interestingly, was a Republican, young white male who has voted for Trump previously, and so's his family, his parents, and he was neutralized, to coin a phrase from the Secret Service, immediately. But Donald Trump, by turning his head just an inch or two, dodged a bullet. I mean, that obviously nobody wants him dead, but at the same time, that was an historical moment that put him right back in the headlines. It also raised his messiah complex in a way, didn't it? and those evangelicals that think that, he is invincible, and that it was the fact that he's touched by the hand of God is the reason that he didn't die in that moment. Just talk to the assassination from a clinical perspective. I mean, it's really the last thing you want to happen, to a narcissist in this way, to survive this type of attack, right?
Not only that, the way he responded to it by putting his head up high and raising his fist and calling out fight in ways that discombobulated the Secret Service agents, apparently, so much so that they allowed him to be fully exposed. But that comes to show how great this need for external validation is, that even in a moment where he could have almost died, he is not of such a psychological structure that would have feared for his life above all else at that time, as a normal person would do, but rather he was fearful that he would appear weak, which is why he went for his psychic survival above his physical survival. So that was one of the things that was remarkable to me. And of course, he immediately tried to state it in an understated way, but it was very obvious he was saying that he is somehow God ordained and chosen to be continuing and to avoid such a situation that came close to leading him to death. So you're right in that it fueled his Messiah complex. It was really an extraordinary event, both for the way it happened. In fact, history was changed by just a couple inches, and was very much on the way to creating a Messiah. The Supreme Court made him a king. The assassination attempt made him a Messiah. And it would have
what's so interesting, though, is that he is a coward, right? He's clearly always been a coward, dating back to bone spurs and everything else. But this event kind of gave the impression that he was the opposite of cowardly, and that's how he sold it to his supporters and followers. So he almost tried to take the credit for dodging the bullet, and the punching the air and getting that photograph, which he knew would go viral because there was a small trickle of this ear blood, not the lobe as he called it, which is way down here. He took no interest in the anatomy, but just in that moment, it ricocheted around the world, and he knew that. He knew it as he was doing it, so much so that he put his own Secret Service people at risk, put their lives at risk by delaying his exit from the stage. And as we've seen from previous assassination attempts, the Secret Service would remove the target immediately, and he wouldn't go. And that in itself, to me, was a display of how dangerous he is. The fact that he was happy for 6 or 7 or 8 other humans to take a bullet on his behalf.
Yes, absolutely. It's very much in the manner that he tried to show he was brave against COVID, and look at how I survived it. Don't let it, don't be fearful of it, despite the hundreds of thousands of people he would be imperiling. And that appears extraordinarily brave, because ordinary people are not capable of that kind of defiance. But it actually comes from his pathology, once again, that he is not so tethered to reality, that he does not truly consider the dangers. He does not believe they apply to him. And rather, what is important to him is what he is able to not only use that occasion to garner support, but to buttress this otherworldly, godly image of himself. And that's
to sell merchandise as well, of course.
Exactly. It's a kind of sales pitch. It's his own advertising, which he has honed over the course of his entire life to compensate for the deficiencies that he has. What we don't recognize is that sometimes mental impairments can manifest in masterful manipulation and out of this hunger for external, not only validation, but deception and a grandiose delusion of oneself that one wishes to cultivate, not just for oneself, but for one's audience. That can manifest in this kind of image. So that is why I feel that the expertise of mental health professionals was so critical from early on to point out that the most dangerous disorders are not so obvious, are not what we typically think of as a dangerous individual. For example, I've dealt with many violent offenders, and they actually present in very similar ways. They would not think twice about risking their lives just to get back at an insult, or to spend the rest of one's life in prison because they couldn't hold back the anger and desire for revenge in that moment. But they shrink like a 2-year-old when they see the needle.
It's so interesting. Do you remember the phone call that was leaked the night of the assassination attempt, where he called RFK Jr. and he sounded thrilled to have been shot at? His voice was energized. He was like, yeah, it was crazy. I mean, the bullet came at me and I just turned my head, and he was talking in a way that he was boasting about it. Completely different to the very next day, which was the RNC convention, where he spoke over this somber music and said, I shouldn't be here, and they tried to take me. Proof that it's all performative. But, Trump was just talking about it just sounding like a large mosquito by his ear. And then, of course, we had the whole fake bandage situation where he didn't have a bandage on playing golf. Then he's at the RNC with this huge bandage on so that everybody can see it. I mean, this is, for anyone who's interested in his pathology, this is a minefield of material, isn't it?
Yes, because it's all about image, and all that matters is the image he projects. I see it with violent offenders all the time. They may fight to their death to guard their honor, they say, but it's really their image. They will risk spending the rest of their life in prison and wear it as a badge of honor because they did not allow themselves to be diminished. And they're often developmentally wounded themselves, so that they are not to the point where they consider risk to one's life and the ordinary things that adults are concerned about. Any adult who understands what that assassination attempt meant would not have dealt with it the way he had. We would be much more serious about it and sober about it.
People speculated, though, that it might change him. And I know that his kids were being interviewed about it, and the media was saying with a straight face, has it changed him? Trying to talk about Donald Trump like he's neurotypical. And, for those of us who are interested in mental health, we were like, no. I mean, if anything, this has kind of egged him on and put him on an even greater pedestal. So what would you say about the way the media handled the coverage of the assassination attempt? Were you frustrated like I was about their naivety, expecting him to behave like a regular person?
Well, it's actually been quite awful and detrimental, in fact, dangerous to the public to be covering him as a normal individual. It's actually worse than no coverage at all. And it has encouraged his wishful desires to project his defenses, which are the opposite of his actual condition, to be taken to be reality. And ever since the New York Times came out and essentially denounced mental health experts as the only experts not allowed to speak on the area of their expertise, that we have been suffering from this problem because if anything, mental health problems require more expert input than almost any other, because other things, I talk about physical illnesses, for example, you would be the one taking yourself to the doctor in the hospital for care. But when you are mentally afflicted, then the very agency that would be able to seek help or find solutions is what is affected. And we're currently still at that state. It's great that mental health is more in the discourse, but I don't see the situation changing with mental health experts being called to major programs. As I was in the beginning, there was almost no major news program I wasn't invited to, cable or network, when we didn't have this inhibition by the APA's disinformation campaign. They should have known that what they did was pull out an obscure Goldwater rule to advance the idea that the conscientious, independent mental health experts who are speaking up were being somehow unethical. But what it failed to mention was that the Goldwater rule itself encourages public education. And the reason for its inclusion in the first place was to highlight our responsibility to the community and our requirement to better public health. And then there's a Geneva Declaration that says that it's an absolute obligation that we speak up against a dangerous regime, having experienced Nazi Germany, and the Geneva Declaration is a modification of the Hippocratic Oath that came out of the Nuremberg trials. But
this is America, though, isn't it? And
yes.
This is what I've come to realize as an immigrant living here, is that America is like a movie that is just permanently playing. Like, people think that it's a film. They don't realize that it's real life. And so there is this aspect of, it's like ambulance chasing. It's like the people that drive slowly past an accident just as if they can see anything dramatic. Whereas, your heart tells you shouldn't be looking, but your head's like, come on, show me. And I feel that, from living in the US now, as long as I have, that there is this disassociation that goes on with some people where they can read about fascism and they can read about these dictators of history, but they cannot connect it to their modern reality because of American exceptionalism, the fact that we've lived during peacetime in the main, and that the idea that the fall of US democracy is actually a reality. So could you talk to that this notion that, and it certainly includes the media, that because invariably a lot of the media, they like their jobs, they want to carry on doing their jobs, and they don't want to, in the same way that you were called out as an expert, they don't want to be called out. So they just want to get on with the status quo of just writing these salacious celebrity stories, of which Donald Trump is one.
Yes, when we broke out in the public sphere, we were the number one topic of national conversation, and I was told that this was not supposed to happen, that they had their narrative, they had their pundits, and they had a kind of storyline that they were supposed to tell, and we were not supposed to simply catapult to public awareness by our expertise alone. And, but that, precisely points to the problem. Why did the American Psychiatric Association come out with its disinformation campaign? Why did it silence mental health experts at all cost? It had no jurisdiction over anyone other than its members, which is 6% of the mental health professionals. And yet they made the Goldwater rule a household phrase for a while when not even psychiatrists knew about it. We were never trained in it, but we were trained in the duty to warn, the duty to protect, the requirement to protect potential victims and the public in the case of danger. And why did that kind of matter-of-fact, rational conclusion not take root? And once it was about to, why did they have to root it out at all cost? I was erased from at least a dozen different articles in the New York Times who tried to quote me, and I would be edited out at last minute, sometimes to the surprise of senior reporters. And why did the chief editor of the opinion section try so hard, even accepted a couple of my essays and could not get my opinion published? Why did 70 different invitations by CNN and MSNBC get canceled at last minute? Many of them even recorded but not aired. The latest was NPR, which was very surprising to me, much to the surprise of the host who recorded a segment with me. And one of them was a very popular show. So we know that...
Thank goodness for independent media, I was going to say, because, you have found a voice and a platform in independent media. It's clear to the people now that so much of the media, not just the far right media, the Foxes and the Newsmaxes, but even the legacy networks and the corporate media, they are still rooting for Donald Trump for the win, because he represents revenue and profit. And again, this goes back to this being a uniquely American problem, whereby so many decisions are made not from an ethical perspective, but from a profit perspective. And that is why the US has the biggest economy, and that is why, these networks turn the kind of profits that they should, when really the news should not be for profit. And in the countries that do the best coverage, they're not for profit. And so, my issue, and it's connected to my previous question, is this a uniquely American problem? That the truth is irrelevant, the facts are irrelevant, it's more about just, the spotlight.
I think it has become a problem of our contemporary times, where even a professional association as the American Psychiatric Association had to go against its own science to promote its disinformation, which brought in huge revenues. They got windfalls of federal funding and obtained a building in the middle of Washington, D.C. under the Trump administration. And it's also happening with universities. Of course, you know what happened in my situation. Many were watching my lawsuit against Yale when I was dismissed because I launched the lawsuit not so much for myself, but to try to find out what had happened so that this doesn't happen to other voices. What we know is that on spurious grounds, in fact, there were so many maneuverings and errors along the way that it was quite obvious that the courts dismissed my case because it had to be dismissed, no matter how little the argument had to do with the issue. A federal court not dealing with the federal issue of free speech. Even Professor Lawrence Tribe was astonished and furious. Well, we see a situation here where not even academics and professors can speak up any longer. There's no protected sphere. So where will we get the truth? And where will we get the information we need to solve the real problems of our day? It appears that we're not able to, even at the peril of our nearly becoming the first species in existence to bring about its own extinction.
It is that serious, isn't it? And that's the bit that people can't quite comprehend. Is it because the threat is so great that people don't want to go there? You know, people just don't want to talk about it because it's a subject that it's too abrasive in a way. The idea that one man, in the case of Donald Trump, is capable of so much destruction is so dangerous. And you know, we only, you know, he is with Putin and Kamala Harris is with Zelensky, and that's all you really need to know about this race. And yet people are overlooking all of Putin's crimes. They're overlooking all of the criminality associated with these corrupt nations and these corrupt dictators, because their worship of Donald Trump is such that supporting him is worth it, even if it means the country crashing and burning.
Well, because they see his power, and his power is the power of mental pathology, the ability to capture
minds. That's very addictive
mind.
to them. Yeah.
Yes. And he circumvents rationality. He is able to enlist people to whip up a fervent following in ways that no rational person can. And at the same time, as he is highly manipulable for dangerous leaders who have nefarious intents. There's a huge difference between him in the position of the most powerful position in the most powerful nation of the globe versus having a rational person who would not be so manipulable. So my suspicion is that for this election, that there is really no room for complacency. We're absolutely overjoyed, and as I am, that we have a truly viable candidate, but it's not a done deal in the sense that people do not recognize what Donald Trump is further capable of, what institutions and those who are propping him up will not stop at doing, and also our inability to address the issue for what it is. Again, I'm very happy that there's more of a mental health discourse going, but we're not addressing fitness. And the fitness exam that we did that showed him unfit to hold any job, let alone the most difficult and intricate job in existence. And just how serious this is. This was a panel of independent top mental health experts around the country. We've convened another panel to do a pre-sentencing report in which we did our dangerousness risk assessment for Judge Juan Merkin in New York, only because he's the only judge who has gotten that far and has not been blocked. But his sentencing itself has been delayed several months to the point where it will hardly matter for the election. So now it depends on the American people alone. We've been trying to get our message out, but apparently the media are quite aware that we are trying to get our message out and are blocking it, except for when it's entertainment related, or if the person is not a real mental health professional, or even among mental health professionals, those who are more entertainment oriented than truly serious minded. And that concerns me. If that's the only message that can get out, how far can we go? And of course, the public is hungry for it. We know from the fact that just when anyone mentions it, the public is just extremely responsive to that message. And I'm happy for Conway's anti-psychopath PAC. In fact, we were able to score Donald Trump on the psychopathy scale in assessing his dangerousness, and it is truly off the charts. Truly the most dangerous individual we could conceive of. And so what are we doing about it? And why aren't we mobilizing it to the commensurate level that the situation demands? That is what concerns me. And if the media are airing certain persons or certain messages, it seems to be because they decided that it will not have the ultimate effect that we are hoping it would, which is to stop this advance of fascism in a way that will not only keep our democracy safe, but keep our survival safe.
We have to take another quick break, but I want to come back and finally just talk about the way that he has changed in the last few weeks in terms of his competence, and if that is going to affect his potential ability to get elected, and especially his presidency. That's next on The Weekend Show. Most Americans think they spend around $62 a month on subscriptions, but the real number is closer to $300. That is literally thousands of dollars every year, half of which we've probably even forgotten about. Thankfully, I started using Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps you lower your bills so that you can grow your savings. They found a bunch of subscriptions that I'd forgotten about, and they helped me cancel the ones that I didn't want anymore. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in cancelled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/weekend. That's rocketmoney.com/weekend. rocketmoney.com/weekend. We're back on The Weekend Show with Dr. Bandy Lee. We're seeing a Donald Trump in response to the success of Kamala Harris in the polls become more explicit with his language, more abusive, more aggressive, saying that, if she wins, you're not going to have a country anymore. He refers to a nation in decline, despite the fact that the country, both economically and socially, seems to be doing really rather well at the moment. He's also spoken about the fact that, the threat of socialism and communism. Well, he said that about Joe Biden the first time round, and it never materialized. He said it about Barack Obama, and it didn't materialize. And Republicans have been saying this stuff for years, and still we're a capitalist nation. So, the reality of how the country is versus what he is describing are two very different things. Why is it that his supporters are not able to see the reality from the fantasy? Because even Fox News, when they were covering his crazy, weird press conference the other day, when he was talking about the economy and talking about the stock market crashing, which it didn't. They actually had to take the on-screen chyron off that showed the stock market, the live ticker of the stock market, because it contradicted what he was saying in the moment. I mean, that is the level of desperation with these propaganda networks. But I just struggle with how people can be convinced that the nation is in decline when it quite clearly isn't.
Trump contagion, the spread of symptoms.
I knew you were going to say that. Yeah.
The spread of symptoms which have a need to invert reality. So the defenses will take over. That's why his followers see Donald Trump as a strong person, not a weak one, as a powerful, capable person, not someone who is unfit to hold any job. And they have to overlook the actual reality that he, because of his mental impairments, caused more American deaths than all the wars since the Civil War combined. 1.2 American deaths from the COVID-19, disastrous mismanagement, from the almost overturning the government by violent insurrection, which is betrayal, treason, as well as his upending the world order in ways that we are experiencing such perilous geopolitical instability right now.
Yeah, what the shooting down of an airliner after he went after Soleimani is one that I often reference, where, you know, an airliner full of people who were killed, innocent people who were killed because of the reaction to the way that he handled the killing of Soleimani. And you could even connect the 40,000 dead Palestinians to Donald Trump's rhetoric as well. And so,
Absolutely.
But that doesn't seem to affect him in any way, does it? If anything, it just gives him a greater hunger for power.
Well, if you look back to all the rhetoric between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, if Biden were excoriated for even just minor missteps or impairments in the midst of admirably carrying out his duties, versus Donald Trump's severe mental impairments, his psychotic spiral, which I'm witnessing him experience as his presidential lead is unraveling, and his cognitive decline, far more significant and severe than anything Biden has shown. But as I said, Trump contagion affects both his followers and his opponents, because of, first, his followers will take on his symptoms. You don't need physical exposure for the contagion to take hold, just emotional bonds. And his opponents will feel such pressure to believe in the way that he believes. That's why he goes for the big lie, the most outrageous pictures of reality you can imagine, saying that the election was stolen, for example, when he so clearly lost, and saying that he was the best president for African Americans when he's one of the greatest racists we've seen, and
even the greatest president since Lincoln or Washington. I mean, he makes these extreme comparisons. And even, as you mentioned earlier, the Martin Luther King Jr. speech, the I Have a Dream speech, which is arguably one of the great speeches in history. And he referenced that, saying that his speech was not just better, but played to a bigger crowd, and then lied about the geography of the situation. Yes. I mean, these are so blatant, aren't they? And so what you're saying is that the Trump contagion is such that people, it's irrelevant, that because there's no barometer for reality versus the fantasy. You're just in the tank for Trump no matter what. And that in itself is a mental health issue on a national level. And it's not
And
just about one man.
what he's doing
Yeah.
is essentially toppling everyone so that they will lose their bearing and forget
Right.
what they were seeing and experiencing as reality, so that they will take on what he says, in part, not to be threatened and intimidated. And these are the kinds of things that it's basically behavioral management that the public was tasked with and had no way to carry out without expert input, because no one really has handled this level of mental pathology before. And of course, someone who is so pathologically impaired will wish to invert the very definition of what is health versus sickness than to admit that they are ill. So that is
Thursday,
why
Sorry, carry on.
That is why I feel that regaining our grounding in reality is essential, and for people to hear from mental health experts, not just one or two, but a whole group of them, as we're trying to bring together at the conference. It will be a major all-day conference at the National Press Club Ballroom, end of September, where we will bring together a bunch of mental health experts, top experts who will contribute to a new short book, which we will also present at that time, called The More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, Psychiatrists and Mental Health Experts Warn Anew. And we will also present top experts of other fields who will attest to just how important this issue is for all other areas to carry out ordinary business. We have seen that ordinary politics is not possible unless we have a basic level of mental health, unless we address that issue for what it is and not something else. We will not have any of this under control, just like the COVID-19 pandemic. It doesn't just go away because we wish it away. We have to deal with it.
You need expertise.
Yes. In its own terms.
Wouldn't it be interesting if the news networks, instead of having these political pundits on with their opinions all the time, where they all sit round a table and the experts were either clinical experts or people who had actually studied political science, where we had a greater level of a kind of academic understanding of these situations. My fear is that people are so, not all people, I don't want to generalize, but some people are so far removed from academia that they will listen to what you're saying and be like, well, that's just her opinion, without any understanding of the decades of not just education, but experience you have in the field. And that is something that has happened across the board with expertise. And Dr. Anthony Fauci, I guess, is the perfect example of this, someone who devoted his life to public health and was just ridiculed by the right and by Donald Trump as being, an enemy of the people, which is terrifying. Could we just talk very quickly, though, to Thursday at an event? It was Trump was at an event with Jewish supporters at his golf club in Bedminster. And it was meant to center on fighting anti-Semitism. Well, Trump ended up saying that a civilian Presidential Medal of Freedom is better than the Medal of Honor because soldiers who are recognized are in very bad shape or they're dead. I mean, you couldn't even make this up if you tried, Dr. Lee. I mean, this is what's so frightening about it. And this really ties into his view of of people who are in the military. We had a similar thing with his references to John McCain. I prefer veterans who don't get captured and all this stuff. I mean, what is his beef with this kind of notion of the military? considering that he always claims that, under him, the military was the toughest and the strongest. Again, it's a contradiction, isn't it?
Yes, but it's not a contradiction in terms of his symptoms.
Right.
He is perpetually trying to avoid facing his own weakness, his own frailty, even as a human being. That's why he has to be godlike, chosen by God, the second coming of God. He's said many of these things. And he cannot face or even conceive of honoring what he sees as weakness, because it brings attention to his own weakness. And we haven't seen it only in Donald Trump. It's mostly in any totalitarian regime has sought to, genocides often happen under these types of regimes because they cannot tolerate the minority group or the weaker group, those to whom their own fragility is projected. And so they think that if they can project it, have the other group own it, and then eliminate that group, then they themselves will be free of that affliction. But of course, it doesn't work that way.
He was at the National Association of Black Journalists, which has become a kind of infamous car crash interview where he fought with this rather brilliant journalist who tried to hold him to account, and he just went for her, accused her of asking horrible questions and not, exchanging pleasantries with him at the beginning, which he did do. He just conveniently forgot, blamed her for the thing running late when he was the reason it was late, but then went on to say that Kamala Harris has an identity issue. Is she black or is she Asian? She needs to decide, because he's like, I don't mind, but she needs to make up her mind because it's unfair to the people. Talk to me about this projection, this notion, because the birtherism issue obviously is a leftover from the Obama storyline for him. This is racism, isn't it? Pure and simple.
Yes, and his inability to, whenever he speaks of others, he is essentially speaking of himself. That's what projection is about. And the more severe one's symptoms, the more severe the projection will be. I had an entire Twitter account that was devoted to translating Donald Trump's speech, because he would be confessing over and over what was going on with him by attacking others and accusing others of his own deeds. So if the press or the public were to understand that dynamic and not be led astray by what he is trying to manipulate and the situation he's trying to create, the perceptions he's trying to create, and impaired individuals are far better than normal persons who try to awkwardly create the situation. We know that he gets away with far more than normal individuals would. That is because the subconscious is at work, and much of it is almost automatic for him. And it creates a seamless picture where the scenario is as he says. But as we know, he is the one who brought down the stature of the entire nation. He is the one who worsened situations for minorities to a degree where Black Americans experience unprecedented deaths. Hispanic Americans live in constant fear. And he is the one who ruined the economy to the point where it causes the inflation and
the laughter thing is something that he struggles with. He says the rest of the world is laughing at us, when the rest of the world is laughing at him. Not just famously that moment at the United Nations where he said that that he's had done the greatest made the greatest changes to America since ever. And, all the
Exactly.
assembled dignitaries started giggling. And he was like, well, I wasn't expecting that. He can't get over that, can he?
So look at how you can immediately reinterpret what he is saying and turn it back on him and get a fair assessment of the actual situation. Most people are not able to do that. And that is why if mental health experts had come on the news media, public programs on a weekly basis, daily basis, I mean, we have legal experts talking about his every detail of his legal cases all the way through. Why couldn't we talk about his mental health issues as they are happening every moment of the day, not just in what we would identify as the mental health sphere, but all spheres, because all human affairs are affected when the mental health is affected. So
and the
that's
confession stuff, when he says, because the one he's been doing recently, which interests me the most, is he refers to Kamala Harris and says she's going to cheat. Now, if every statement is a confession, he's effectively telling us that he is going to cheat at the election, which some of us are predicting.
That is his.
We have to take that very seriously, don't we? Right.
Yes, absolutely. There is no doubt he is going to cheat. And there is no doubt that he won't accept a loss, especially this time when he has so many supporters and so many groups backing him. And he has not only been not held accountable so that his expectations would balloon on their own, but he has been actively encouraged. And people who are simply looking at ratings and numbers, as you said, or their political careers, have attached themselves to him in ways that validate his worldview, that all that matters are ratings and popularity and number. Even reality is determined by how many people you bring on to believe your lie.
People seem to forget that the threat to democracy is not just him winning the election. The threat to democracy is him every day saying that there was election fraud last time when there wasn't, talking about it being rigged, talking down on the institutions from the Justice Department to the FBI and everything in between. That is the ongoing threat to democracy, isn't it? Where people lose trust in the institutions that make up a modern democracy. And so, as you say, that is not going to end, is it?
Or even exclude the most relevant experts because intellectuals and journalists are the ones who are first to be eliminated in times of authoritarianism. Right. Because
fake news, truth, the enemy of the people.
That's right. Because truth becomes a threat. And ethical journalism represents, delivery of the truth. And intellectuals represent vigorous pursuit of the truth by making accessible the best available knowledge. And that is why when we don't have that knowledge made available to us, that we're bound to be victimized, misinformed, misguided, and victimized to the advantage of authoritarians and not to the benefit of democracy. In fact, the very definition of democracy is that we do need access to the information and facts that would allow us to make well-informed, rational, self-serving decisions as a collective whole, as rulers of ourselves.
Just finally, there's two things I have on my mind. One is that how lucky we are that Joe Biden did a selfless act and recognized that Kamala Harris would be because he took the role, or he decided to run for office initially when he heard Donald Trump try on both sides Charlottesville. He's stepping aside to make room for Kamala Harris because he knows that the threat to democracy is so great that it's not worth the risk. And he has to put his ego to one side to know that the amount of energy that she has for this. She also has a brilliant running mate now, and that clearly people have woken up to the fact that not going back, her phrase, actually means something. And we would be foolish not to mention the reversal of Roe versus Wade, which is going to have a huge effect on the outcome of this election. So there's that. But coupled with that, my other thinking is that if there was ever a personality trait that you did not want to give power to, it's the malignant narcissist and the sociopath that Donald Trump is. He is literally the last person on the planet that you either want to give a presidency to, or even the presidency of a local chess club, because we've seen the effects of having somebody like him be handed the keys to power.
Yes, absolutely. They are the most dangerous individuals in existence. It's the most dangerous psychiatric condition that wreaks more havoc than all other psychiatric conditions combined. And yet it is the most deceptive, most manipulative, and difficult to detect, that even requires specialists of high levels of training within psychiatry to be able to identify. And the fact that the public, that we had this knowledge, we knew what kind of person he was. And we knew the level of his dangerousness, unfitness, as well as mental impairments from the very first day, and that the public was not able to gain access to that information. It was initially, but it was blocked at a key moment. And ever since, it has not gotten it in a way that truly the situation warrants, the danger to them warrants, speaks greatly to the failure of our democracy. I did a multi-country, multi-decade study of countries around the world and how the democracy index affected violent death rates. And we found that democracy alone was no longer able to prevent violent deaths as it largely had in the past. Once democracies stabilized, they were remarkably peaceful. But lately they haven't been, because democracies are no longer real democracies. They have such great levels of inequality. The vast difference between the rich and the poor seems to negate whatever gains are made from overturning autocracies or other forms of dominating governments. So that's something we probably need to look at very carefully. And I speak about democracy as a sign of collective mental health. I speak about that in my book, The Psychology of Trump Contagion, An Existential Threat to American Democracy and All Humankind. I also speak about ways of preventing such a dangerous presidency, as well as a populace that would be open to such a destructive leader, and strengthening our societal mental health in ways that will not only prevent this, but make even the possibility of something like this far into the horizon, so that it's that it doesn't threaten us constantly. It is, from beginning to end, from my perspective, a mental health issue that cannot be discussed without a mental health perspective, because, we require mental health as mental capacity, as a basic building block for our capacity to do everything else. And so that's why this issue has been so important to me, not just because I'm a mental health expert, but because it has become such a societal crisis, really, and public health emergency. And so I appreciate journalists like yourself who are willing to buck the trend and have me on. I hope that we'll be able to hold the major public National Press Club conference as we plan the end of next month, to be able to highlight the importance of this issue.
Okay, well, we are very grateful for your expertise, and I should say that you and I have been talking in this forum for a couple of years now, and everything you've said, both before we started talking and since, has come true. And I think that is a testament to your experience, your expertise, and your skill. And we're very, very grateful to you. Dr. Bandy Lee, thank you for joining the Weekend Show.
Thank you very much for having me.
I'm Anthony Davis. Don't forget to support me and independent journalism at patreon.com/5Minute News. See more of me on the 5 Minute News YouTube channel. And I'll be back next Sunday with a brand new special guest and more factual news to discuss on the 5 Minute News Weekend Show with Midas Touch.